Hi, my name is Stacy Hunter, and I'm going to teach you about the brachial plexus. So what is it? The brachial plexus is a network, or plexus, of nerves formed by the ventral ramus of the lower four cervical nerves and the first thoracic nerve, C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1, and it goes down to your arm. So the first thing I like to think about is a mnemonic. Randy Travis drinks cold beer. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out. Randy Travis drinks cold beer. And go ahead and write this out with me on a piece of paper. It'll help. Okay, so Randy stands for something. Travis does, drinks, cold, and beer. So I'm going to go ahead and start writing out what they stand for. So Randy stands for roots. Travis stands for trunks. Drinks stands for divisions. Cold stands for chords. And beer stands for branches. And these are going to be the terminal branches, because we've got some baby branches as well. Okay, so for the next part, I need to know how many items are in each category. So I start with the one in the middle. And so this is divisions. There's 6 divisions. On each side, they'll be the same number. So there's 3 trunks and 3 chords. There are 5 roots and 5 branches. I'm going to switch colors. And now I'm going to start writing out the 5 roots. So like I said before, it starts at C5 and goes down to T1. Now, these are the spinal nerves that come off of our vertebrae. So C5, C6, C7. Now, remember, there's not a vertebrae C8, but there is a nerve, and it comes under that vertebrae. And then we have T1, and that's in our thorax. So our cervical spine is made up of C5 through C8 to make our brachial plexus, and then T1 from our thoracic vertebrae. So I'm going to draw a big line on every other one, starting at C5, C7, and T1. Now I'm going to connect C6 to C5, and then I'm going to connect C8 to T1. Okay, so now we've got our roots. Okay, so we're going to also add in some baby branches. That's what I like to call them. Now, don't get confused. It's not the same as the terminal branches that are at the end. So we're going to start with, just like when we count, we start with 1, and then we go to 2. So here's 1 branch, and now there's 2 baby branches after coming off of C5, and then 2 off of C5, C6. I'm going to draw a line all the way down, a big long line. Don't worry, we'll name that in a second. And that's the baby branches coming straight off of those roots. And now we've got our trunks. So there are 3 trunks. In anatomy, we call something on top superior. So that's what that one is. If something is lower, it's going to be inferior. So I'll write inferior. And if there's something in the middle, we're just going to call it middle. So now I've got a superior, middle, and an inferior trunk. Okay, Now I'm going to go and start talking about my divisions. Now I know it seems scary because there's a bunch of divisions, but really it's not bad. So I'm going to start with doing a strike and a spare. So a strike in bowling is an X and a spare is just like that. Okay, so even though there's 6, it's just anterior and posterior. So it's A, P, A, P, P, A. So I'm going to write that. A, P, A, P, P, A. Pretty easy. Okay, so for my next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about this because sometimes I get confused on the exam or whatever. So I want you to notice that all of my posteriors are going together. So there's one coming from the superior trunk, so I'm going to draw that in pink. Then there's one coming from the inferior trunk, and then there's one coming from the middle. So they all join together at the middle. So those are all posterior, just in case you get confused. And the other ones are going to go to the outside, our anterior ones. So now that we have our 6 divisions, we've got to start naming our chords. Now, since we've got all of our posterior divisions coming together, our chord is going to be named posterior as well. So I'm going to write that down. Okay, since we can't name our other 2 chords anterior, however, they do sit more anterior in the body, we're going to have to name them different names. So one is going to be more lateral than the other. One's going to be more medial. So our top one is going to be called lateral chord. And our bottom one is going to be named medial chord. Now make sure you remember it's medial, and that'll be more important later. So now we've named our 3 chords: lateral, posterior, and medial. So there are baby branches coming off of these chords as well. So it's 1, 3, and 3. And don't worry, we're going to name those in a little bit. But just remember it's 1, 3, 3. Okay. So I'm going to shorten these lines. We're getting a little bit too long. Got excited. And so in the body, if you remember, we tell you to look at the arm and find the M. So sometimes students have a hard time seeing the 2D picture and then going to lab and seeing it in 3D. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out that M for you so that you can see it on the diagram. And I'm going to draw that in a lighter blue color. So here's this M shape. So if you turn your head to the left, you can see that M and how it's formed from our lateral and medial chords. And I want you to note it took many roots and trunks and divisions to make up those chords which make up our branches. Now our posterior chord has 2 branches coming off of it, so that's why I drew 2 branches. Okay, so let's name them. So I think of it as marmu, M-A-R-M-U, marmu. That's how I remember the branches. So the top M stands for musculocutaneous. It's a long word, so I'm having to write it on 2 lines, but it's one word. Okay, now that one in our body of our M, that one is really short, and it's going to pierce coracobrachialis. Our next one, our A, is axillary. Then we have radial. Then we've got median. Now remember, that one is different. So note, it's the median nerve, but the medial cord. And then we have ulnar. So I'm underlining the AN so that you remember it's median nerve. Because if you're on a practical, for example, they may not put nerve or cord, and they'll put medial and median, and they're tagging one of them. Make sure you know which one it is, because people get that confused very often. Okay, so all that's left is for us to name our baby branches. And we're almost done. Okay, so we're going to start right here at our lateral cord. So it's got lateral in its name, and if there is a lateral, there's going to be a medial as well. So here we've got lateral pectoral. Remember when we were talking about pec major, lateral pectoral goes there, and also medial pectoral. So here's our medial pec. And that one pierces through the pec minor to get pec major. So we've got two more medial. And so these two provide sensation to our arm and our forearm. So our arm is called the brachium and our forearm is called the antebrachium. And things that are sensory are cutaneous nerves. So we've got our medial brachial cutaneous and our medial antebrachial cutaneous. So I'm going to write those down. It got cut off just a little bit, but remember, it's medial brachial cutaneous and medial antebrachial cutaneous. Okay, so let's name our posterior cord branches. So I like to think of this as a sub-sandwich. For our bread, we've got our upper subscapular, and then for our lower piece of bread, we've got our lower subscapular nerve. I'm just abbreviating subscap. So we've got to have something in between our bread, and that is going to be our thoracodorsal nerve. And that one goes to our latissimus dorsi. Okay, so now that we've got our sub-sandwich and off of our posterior cord, we've named our lateral and medial cord. We just have to go back up to the top to our roots and start naming those. So our roots came off of our spine. So these nerves that we're going to name, they are going to be straight off our spine. So our first one is dorsal scapular, and that goes to our rhomboids and our levator scapulae. So remember, that's coming right off of that scapula and at our spine. So that's where that one's located. Okay, so now we're going to go to our next branch. So that's suprascapular. So I'm going to write that down. And that supplies our supraspinatus and infraspinatus. Got to move my line a little bit. Okay, our next one is going to be nerve to subclavius. And our subclavius is that little muscle that sits under our clavicle. Not super important, but we'll go ahead and write it down. Nerve to subclavius. And I'm just putting it in, and that stands for nerve. So don't get confused. Now our last one is that long branch that goes all the way down. So that would be our long thoracic. Okay, that's it. We've got it. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a few little tips about how to study for the brachial plexus and what to do. So number one, I want you to write this out 100 times. Be able to write it out in your sleep. Over and over and over again. Be able to know this diagram. So if you want to go ahead and put it on your sheet of paper, when you get your scrap sheet and you start with the test, you can write this out and you know what all of these are. Okay, the second step is I want you to match the muscles with the nerves. So long thoracic, that was our last one. Be able to know, okay, that's serratus anterior. And do that for all of these. Okay, number 3. I want you to ask yourself, what is the action of those muscles? So I know that it's this nerve. I know it's this muscle. What's that action? Okay. So for the 4th step, I want you to know what the blood supply is. So long thoracic, for example, we said that was serratus anterior. You need to know that the blood supply for serratus anterior is lateral thoracic. Those have very similar names, so know that it's long thoracic nerve and lateral thoracic artery. Make sure that you're saying nerve and artery every time that you go through this so that you know which is which and you don't get confused on the exam. Okay, number 5, I can't stress this one enough. Make sure that you are in the lab and going to lab and you can see it on the body. Sometimes just getting that orientation definitely helps. So make sure that you're going in the lab. Don't wait till the last minute to go to lab to prep for the practical. Make sure that you are doing that early on in the game. Do it this whole week coming up to your exam. Don't just wait until the weekend. However, I do stress, go in on the weekend, take an hour or two, go in with a friend and say, okay, what is this? Review each other. Make sure that you see those relationships. Make sure you see, okay, musculocutaneous pierces coracobrachialis. So they're probably going to tag that just because I know that it's so important and I know that that's what that muscle is because of that. So just make sure that you know these guys. You'll do great. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate anytime. Thanks.